Hi again. I am going to talk to you guys about working a little bit in your sketchbook and experimenting with watercolor. Maybe some of you guys have had a painting class with me. Maybe some of you haven't. Or maybe you've had painting other places. But I'm going to talk to you about the watercolor, and I'm going to talk to you about kind of a fun way to start your sketchbook. So this is my sketchbook. And you can see I have simply drawn a picture of my little watercolor palette. I know a lot of people have like sketchbook anxiety. They don't like starting a new sketchbook. They feel like they're gonna wreck it. They don't know what to do on the first page. And so I know several artists actually that will draw their art supplies on the first page of their sketchbook always. And so it can be a good way to kind of crack into a new sketchbook. It sort of starts every sketchbook the same way. I know other artists that do a self-portrait on the opening page of every sketchbook, and they sign and date it. They use a mirror. You know, so sometimes having a way to open a sketchbook or start a sketchbook kind of takes out some of that first page anxiety, or I'm gonna like wreck it anxiety. So you know, whatever you decide to open with, and maybe you're one of the lucky artists that doesn't have like this fear of wrecking good supplies. So lucky you. I know more people that kind of have that than don't have that. The other thing we're going to talk about is using this Niji brush here. So you can see I have my drawing already done, but it doesn't have any real color in there. So I have the water in there from when I filled it, and I'm just going to give it a little bit of a squeeze so some of the water comes out into the end. And then simply what I'm going to do is move color over there. I'm also going to talk to you about these colors just so that you can sort of see and understand what colors you have in your palette and a little bit why you have some of the colors that you have in your palette. I'm going to grab a scrap of white paper as well, just so you can kind of compare what the colors look like on the brown or the tan toned paper. It won't make a huge difference. But I'm just going to take a little bit of the paint, and because I'm like just painting swatches right now of my colors, I'm just going to go ahead and move these over here in little squares actually. So you can see there is the gold ochre on my tan paper, and here is the gold ochre on a piece of white paper. So I know it's kind of glary because I'm right under the light in my studio, but you can see that in terms of color, the colors are incredibly similar, even if you're working on the tanned sheet. If I want to get this paint off of here, I can simply use a tissue or a paper towel to kind of wipe that off. Oops, I dropped a big drip. And then I can move on to my next color so that I don't mess them up straight away. And you'll see that some of the colors, I just went back for a little bit more paint, just so I get a little bit more vibrant color. And I'm just gonna make, like I said, nice neat squares of these colors on my paper. I don't have a lot of actual paint on here. I kind of love how vibrant color looks on a toned sheet of paper. I think it's kind of a fun shift sometimes. We so often work on white sheets. It can be really nice to kind of change it up and work on a colored piece of paper for a change. So you can see each time I'm just taking a few licks of the paint and I am moving it over here, both on this card and into my sketchbook. When I see that I don't have the brilliance of color that I want, right? You can notice that I I'm going back and I'm getting more paint off of the paint palette. When we talk about getting watercolor in painting one, I say to pretend like you're licking paint off the pile with your paintbrush. So it's kind of a funny way to think about grabbing that paint color, is that you're licking it off the pile. I am also going to give you the names of these paints just so you have some idea of what colors we're working with, right? Because that is usually useful information. The yellow in here is Hansa yellow. The gold is a gold ochre. The rose is a quinacridone rose, red rose deep. So we're gonna call it Quin Rose. This is cadmium red light. So we're gonna call it Cad Red Light. So you'll notice that each of the colors have kind of they're actually a warm and a cool version of each of the colors. So you have two each of all the primaries. So those are your reds and yellows. Here come the first couple of the blues. And that one, the one that's kind of more, I'll call it royal blue, is ultra marine, which is one word. The next blue is a phthalo blue. So you can see that the phthalo blue is a little more turquoisey than the ultramarine blue. It's got a little bit different color tone to it, which I personally tend to prefer. I'm not a huge fan of ultramarine blue. It's just a little boring for me. Lots of people like it. Not my favorite. Then you have something called Cobalt Turquoise, which is this fun turquoisey color. I'm starting to have a rainbow colored tissue here. So phthalo is, this one is cobalt. And we'll just abbreviate turquoise with Turk. The next color in your palette is Sap Green. This also gives you a really great way to kind of experiment a little bit with watercolor, especially if you guys aren't keen watercolorists. It gives you, painting them out this way gives you a chance to kind of play with the colors and with how to apply those colors in your sketchbook or on a piece of paper. We move now into some of the neutrals that I gave you. So this top brown is the darker brown. And that brown is a burnt umber. Try to remember to add my white square over here as well. And this one, the more orangey brown or reddish brown, is burnt sienna. So this one is Burnt Umber. This one is Burnt Sienna. Both very nice brown tones. Next, we're down to our last two colors here. This top one that's also kind of soupy is what I've given you as black, which looks black when you use it. It's actually Payne's Gray. So an advantage to Payne's Gray over just a straight black is this, and I'll run out some water here, is that the gray that it makes is a really lovely, cool gray, kind of a bluish gray color. With just a straight like coal black, the gray is kind of flatter. So Payne's Gray. And then the last color here is a quinacridone like red violet that I've given you. So it's sort of this brilliant magenta-y purple. So again, we're going to abbreviate quinacridone. With Quin. And there you go. Now you have all of the colors that are in your palette. And you can see that I can paint those out in a little chart. I need to add them back over here as well to my little illustration of my painting set. But this also gives me the names of each of the paints. And then you can kind of see the comparison between the color chart on the white paper and the color chart on the tan paper. And you can see how the tan paper sort of makes those colors pop. I would also encourage you guys to kind of play around with mixing some of these colors together. Some of the colors have some interesting properties. So here is the violet, and then I'm just gonna squirt a little water in here so you can kind of see what happens when you have a bit of a pool. I'm gonna switch now and grab some of this blue, this cobalt blue. This cobalt blue and the violet together make a really cool kind of blue-violet color. So you can see I can kind of experiment with some of the color mixes right here in my sketchbook. They make kind of a grayish purple. Now, a cool kind of comparison or fun fact is that cobalt turquoise is something called a granulating pigment. So what a granulating pigment is that it will like speckle out, like it won't stay in the mix. You can kind of see a little bit of that happening already, I think, in that puddle. So it'll sort of separate, which is kind of fun and can make for some cool painting effects. The Quin violet and this ochre color make a really great kind of golden glowy brown. So you can see those are those two together, which is a really nice color. So you can see that I can kind of start to experiment with some of my colors in my sketchbook, just so I kind of know what some of them do. This is particularly useful if I'm not much of a painter. So I'm going to just label these. So here's my Quin violet and the ochre. This one is my cobalt. So you can see I'm gonna label my experiments here, the cobalt turquoise and the Quin violet, just so I can kind of keep track of what color combinations have I tried and what color combinations do I like, and so that I can kind of play around with those. So like maybe I really like to draw and paint people, but I'm not really sure how to make skin tones. So this is a great way for me to kind of experiment and play around with how do you make some of those colors that you would need to make. So that's kind of an introduction to one, how to use this Niji brush, and two, now you know what colors you have in your sketchbook.